Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Life's Black Belts. I'm happy to be bringing together another inspirational guest today. I'm joined today by Jeff Leisawitz. He is an award-winning musician, producer. He's a critically acclaimed author and internationally distributed filmmaker who has devoted his life to creativity. And Jeff's book, which I think is an amazing title, it's called Not Effing Around, the No Bullshit Guide for Getting Your Creative Dreams Off the Ground. And I love straight up front, forward, and honest people. So you can't get much more straightforward and to the point than the title of that book. So, ladies and gentlemen, today's Life's Black Belt, Mr. Jeff Leisawitz. How are you, sir?
Hey, how's it going, man? Thanks for having me on here.
I'm doing fine, thank you. So, it's really interesting that you have this background in music and art and creativity, and it seems like something that wouldn't normally guide you to a path of trying to get into, life coaching people and writing books. Most people just stick with, if you've dedicated your life to music and teaching and things like that, it seems to consume a lot of your time. So I want to definitely get to how you got there, but why don't we start off with first a little bit about yourself? Like, why don't you tell me just real quick kind of where you grew up and where you're from?
Sure. I grew up in Reading, Pennsylvania, which is not too far from you, right? Where are you?
Right now I'm in Toms River, New Jersey. Yeah, the Jersey Shore is
Jersey Shore. We used to go down to the Jersey Shore, man. We love that.
I say we call it the beach, though. That's the one difference here. People are from out of town when they say they're going to the shore. We're like, we're just going to the beach.
Exactly. So yeah, I grew up there, and sort of went to school around there. Bounced around colleges for a while. Dropped out at some point. Started a tie-dye business. Of course, as my parents were loving that one, as you might suspect. And finally, finished college, moved to LA, pursued music and art, music and screenwriting, photography, stuff like that. Then headed up to Seattle, where I've been since '94, where I got into the grunge, sort of the tail end of the grunge scene and the beginning of the internet world, where I've got some stories about that. I was a music journalist interviewing all these bands. And
wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So when you're growing up in Reading, Pennsylvania, that's not necessarily Amish country, though, is it?
No.
Okay, it's more like Lancaster. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But when you're growing up, are you from a big family, or are you an only child?
Two younger brothers.
Okay.
Yep. So.
And what was life like briefly for you guys growing up, three boys in Reading, Pennsylvania?
Three boys in Reading, Pennsylvania. Lots of playing kickball in the backyard and, riding the bikes. And we had the creek down the street. It was sort of like this half-developed neighborhood kind of thing. And there's this little creek. So one of our favorite pastimes was trying to dam the creek, which was, it was a real small thing, but it was still impossible for a bunch of 8-year-olds.
Sure.
So, the mom would be like, don't go to the creek. I don't want you guys coming back, and we'd come back covered with mud and wet,
But that's kind of the joy of like how we grew up a little bit differently than I have twin 12-year-old girls, so they grow up a lot more online and on social media. And
right.
we of course, being a martial artist myself, my wife was a dancer. She's a manager at Starbucks now, but we're being active people. We've always gotten them like, put your phone down, get outside and play. But I could try to explain to them, like, when there was no phones and there was none of the stuff that you have or social media, you actually had to go outside and figure out stuff to do. And you didn't sit home all day saying to your parents, I'm bored, entertain me. They're like, get outside and go find something to do. And they're like, how did you do that? I'm like, you didn't make a play date. You just knocked on someone's door, be like, hey, you want to hang out? So getting out there and growing up with your brothers and playing in the mud is actually, I think, something that's gotten lost a little bit, and I'm sure, helped you out a little bit. Now, did you guys have a brother as well, but did you guys grow up being very close together? Are you still?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. They live, one in Connecticut and one in New York State now. So, I don't see them as much, but, see them a couple times a year and talk on the phone and the FaceTime and all that stuff. So,
sure. So then as you were growing up, was music an influence in your life from a young age? Like, were your parents involved with music?
Well, the parents weren't particularly involved with music, but I was definitely into music from a young age. It really started when I was probably, again, 7 or 8. I went to a summer camp in the Pocono Mountains, Camp Log and Twig, for any of your
Okay.
listeners who might be into that. And after dinner every night, they had this thing called free play, where they kind of cut the activities and the kids could just run amok around the camp for an hour, like after dinner. And this one summer, probably the summer of maybe 77, 78, 79, there was an empty cabin out there. So one of the counselors brought up a drum kit, a 70s stereo, and a couple crates of records. And after dinner every night, this guy would go and he'd sort of crank up the music and play drums. And I as this little kid, sort of figured this out, and I'd sit at this, under this little tree, 30 feet away from this thing, and the sun would go down and the fireflies would come out, and I'd hear, this rock in the cabin. And one day this guy comes out and he sort of sees me sitting there and he's like, "Hey kid, come here." I'm like, "Ah." It's like, I go up there. He's like, "You want to come in and check this out?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay." So there I am in this empty cabin with a drum kit and a 70s stereo cranked up all the way. And this guy puts on The Who, Won't Get Fooled Again, and just, banging the hell out of the song. And I'm just like, my life is forever changed. I'm like, I want to rock. This is all there is.
Wow.
So
That's cool that you're able to identify that moment, that significant moment that, I think sometimes as we look back into our past, we have lots of memories, but there's a lot that gets lost too. But kind of part of the podcast also, I love hearing about some of these significant moments that stand out along your timeline that help kind of shape who you are. And that seems like a significant one. Did you grow up listening to a lot of classic rock? Was that the genre that you were into?
Yeah, I mean, once I started getting into it and I got a stereo, like it was Radio Shack record players, basically.
Radio Shack, there's a throwback.
Yeah, the Radio Shack stereo. I remember having this babysitter who comes over and she's like, "Hey kid, you got to listen to classic rock radio," which I don't even know if they called it classic rock back then, but it was 70s rock, essentially. Right. It was like the early 80s, maybe. So yeah, then it was Tom Petty and Billy Joel and The Who and Zeppelin and the Stones, just all that great stuff. And that's when I was like, yeah. And I even took that, years forward. I would, I'm also into photography. I'm a photographer. So my grandfather had a dark room in his house and he taught me black and white photography. So I'd go over there in the darkroom for, 3 hours at a time, 4 hours sometimes. And he just had a radio down there or something. So I would just listen to classic rock radio for, 4 hours at a time.
Sure.
And I was like, damn, this is good tunes.
It really is. My father, I definitely credit a lot for my eclectic taste in music because he had hundreds of albums and 45s and original Beatles. And I grew up listening to like the Beatles and Doors and Zeppelin, Pink Floyd and everything in between. Even I remember like in the 80s, my brother and I were getting into Guns N' Roses. He's like, this kind of sounds like Led Zeppelin a little bit. We're like, no, Axl Rose is awesome. And then he put on Page and Plant and listened to Zeppelin. I was like, man, this is, same thing, that moment where you listen and just know like, this is amazing. This is a different type of music than that's out today. And it's still, I still listen to and still enjoy listening to. So now as you're growing up and you have that moment in camp, in high school, what was life like for you? I kind of get through this part, decently quickly, but like, are there any moments throughout high school that help stand out or help shape you and then stand out to you?
Well, musically, I played in bands, and,
okay.
It was always, it's a bunch of high school kids, of course, but, I had some pretty good gigs playing at the high school dance, for the whole gang, really. These, basically drunken high school parties, stuff like that. And,
so what was your instrument of choice while you were in a band?
Guitar and bass.
Okay.
Yeah. But also in high school, this is actually a key moment. I got what was called a 4-track tape recorder, which is, a cassette, the old time cassettes. It was sort of a very basic studio, like very, very basic and crappy recording studio. So I would go into the basement every night and write my songs and play these songs. And of course, it was at the same time when my mom was doing the laundry down there. So I'd get to the end of the song and I'd hit the chord and it would sort of fade out. And then in the background on like half my songs, you can hear goom, 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 like the washing machine going.
That's great.
There's that.
That's fantastic. What was the name of your band?
Oh, geez. One of the bands was called Quarter Pound of Gandhi. The other one, Tweedledum, Tweedledee, The Elephant Gun. We would basically have a different band name for every time.
That's what a great experience. Did that help you? Were you always an outgoing guy growing up, or did the band help you to socialize and meet new people?
Was I an outgoing guy? I don't think I was an outgoing guy. I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. I was always the weird Friendless kid.
Okay.
But I still might have been outgoing. I'm not quite sure about that.
And when you say weird and friendless, because I always find it interesting when people identify themselves a certain way, and you might have said it so many times you skip over it, but why would you classify yourself that way?
Well, the weird part, because I recall as a kid and really up through junior high and even high school, and to some extent even now, people are like, yeah, you're weird. So you hear that enough times, you
start to believe it.
And I agree with that. And I also don't think weird is bad.
Yeah, I think normal is the thing you have to be worried about.
I would agree.
Normal is bland,
It's bland and it's the lowest common denominator, and it's really not thinking for yourself or expressing your truth. And that's really, a big part of what life is about, being who you are and like really being it.
What's the interesting path that you play, though, being a kind of rocker in a band while also feeling like you had no friends and were like the weird guy? Because, obviously to be in front of a group of people, usually if you're a little bit of a loner at the time, wouldn't seem to fit the shell of what you'd be comfortable with. Is that something that were you comfortable back then being uncomfortable, or you just kind of just enjoyed music so much you kind of looked past it?
I just loved the music, and I think I was okay being on stage, doing that. But remember, what appears to be in this world and people's internal perceptions of what's going on are often very different. You can take, these giant rock stars and celebrities and people like that, and a lot of them will say the same thing. I'm really lonely. I feel really isolated, right?
Absolutely.
But wait, you just played to 20,000 people. What's that about? And what about your friends? Well, now that I'm famous, I can't trust anybody. I don't know if they really love me or they want my whatever.
Right.
So, yeah, our internal experiences and what appears to be in this world are very.
Well, I think this comes up a lot with teaching martial arts. There's so many different personalities, but the things I run into compared to what you're saying is people that feel like they can't do it because they're out of shape, they're old, they're overweight, whatever it may be. There's a million reasons that people come up with excuses of why they're no good, or even in the middle of it, they'll sabotage themselves a lot. And I think people look at, just because your job happens to be on TV or in front of 20,000 people, like, you're still a human. One thing my dad always told me growing up, because these are different things you go through in life, trying to figure out who you are and feeling like you stand out, sometimes not in the best way, and how you can fit in. And I remember him saying to me, he's like, listen, one thing my dad always told me that I remember is everyone shits. You know what I mean? No matter what you do, no matter what's going on in your life, at the end of the day, everyone's got to take a shit at home at some point. They may be on a gold throne. They might be surrounded by this gorgeous house and all these fancy cars, but ultimately was trying to get across to me is that we're all the same. Don't make people up to be on this pedestal just because they have a lot of money or job, because when you strip all that away, like you're saying, often the humanity that we go through, the struggles that we go through are very similar, and that's it's hard for people to understand, unfortunately, as we've had this past year, people that, have been very famous and have taken their life, and you see it over and over again and scratch your head and like, you're so beloved, but obviously there's a darkness there that I think we all go through, but we just hopefully have the right amount of people to help us through, or whatever it is that gets us past that. But anyway, I wanted to ask you, when you were finishing up the band and deciding to go to college, and you just mentioned photography, did you go to school for photography or did you go to school for music?
Well, I went to a bunch of different schools
Okay.
for a bunch of different things. I was studying photography for a while, and then that sort of stopped, I guess. That's when I sort of quit school there and went to, do the tie-dyes and all that. Um, I studied some music in college as well, electronic music and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But my degree is actually, I finished college at a place in California called the University of Redlands. And at this, you can sort of apply to get into the special school there, basically a hippie school where you make your own major, you don't get grades, you get evaluations, and you essentially, control most of your experience there. So my degree was called Creative Writing with Perspectives from Philosophy, Religion, and Psychology,
Wow, that's a tongue twister, man.
which I thought was pretty cool. When I phoned that one back into my folks, they were like, "Oh, good God!"
At least it's not tie dye. They're probably excited about that. You're not selling tie dye shirts out of the back of your van anymore, right?
That's right, not anymore. Although sometimes I feel like doing it. Yeah.
I bet that comes with some good stories, though. Being a free spirit when you're young and just trying new things. Why not?
Sure. Yeah.
So when you, what is that degree? What did you feel like you got out of that experience and learning at school with that degree?
I got real deep intellectual exploration and creativity, um, which I actually think is pretty rare in college experiences these days.
Absolutely.
You know, so it in another sense, it taught me like take control of your freaking life. Don't let the world tell you what to do. Right? You know what you want. You know what you want to think about and do. Figure out a way to do it. And that's part of why I went to the school, was so that I knew I could, potentially do this instead of you must take these classes and get this degree and do this. It was like, well, what do I really want in my college degree? And then what do I really want in my life? Because, as you know, the clock is always ticking around here. You got another 30 years to run around this planet, or you get hit by a bus tomorrow. We don't know. So what the hell are you doing?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you kind of, and then it's kind of happens at that age a lot too in college, when you're getting to that age where you're realizing you're not a kid anymore. You're not quite yet an adult and you're trying to figure it all out. So very interesting that you got that out of it. Cause for me, for my entire life, I wanted to go a few different routes without going through the whole story, but I always really wanted to own a martial arts school. I've been into it my entire life. And I remember sitting in college in Montclair State University, taking classes, wondering like, why am I here right now? I felt like it felt like high school part two. I mean, I had taken 4 years of Spanish already, and I still had to take another year of a language. And there's so many things that I took that I had to take and didn't want to take. And I felt like I actually learned more by living on campus, by meeting all these different personalities, by being in a fraternity and getting forced to hang out with some people that you wouldn't normally hang out with, and learning to not judge books by its cover. And everyone tells me like, what'd you like about college? I'm like, I loved everything really, but the classes. And that's what honestly, I mean,
good testimonial.
getting myself up every day, being responsible for yourself. In high school, you're used to people saying, here's your homework, here's your assignment that's due. I remember walking into a college class a few months in, and everyone was getting ready to take a test. I'm like, what, there's a test today? They're like, oh, you didn't read the syllabus? I'm like, no, I figured they would just remind me. They're like, oh, no, welcome to being a grown-up. I'm like, oh, crap. So, I mean, for me, that's what I got out of it. Seems like you were exploring yourself at the same time there. Now, post-college with this degree, did you have a mission of knowing exactly what you wanted to do? And did you follow through on that? Or what happened post-graduation?
Well, yes. Day one after, getting out of college, it was, I'm going to LA to rock. I want to be a rock star. Okay. And much to, again, the chagrin of the parents and peers and basically everybody, don't go to LA, don't go to LA. Of course, I went to LA and started a band and did the thing there. And that LA was pretty tough for me. It was, first of all, the recession in the early 90s. So it was really tough to get a job as a kid out of college, although I did have some cool ones, most specifically as what they call a story analyst, reading prospective scripts, movie scripts for movie producers. So that was kind of cool.
Oh, that's cool.
But yeah, I stayed there about a year, and then I ended up, moving up to Seattle and doing the music journalism and all that. But that's when I got into music for film and TV. And this is a good story that I think your listeners will appreciate.
Cool.
I had a friend in college who got some music into MTV's Real World, if you remember that show, way back then. Mm-hmm. And, maybe 5 or 6 years after college, I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. I should hit those guys up with my tunes. So I got the number and the address, and I sent them my CD and called them up. Hey, did you guys get it? Mm-hmm, yeah, we got it. Did you listen to it yet? No. I'm like, okay. Called them back the next month. Did you guys listen to it? No. Next month, you listen to it? Nope. Next month? No. Literally for a year, I called these guys every month. Finally, the guy picks it up and was like, yeah, we listened to it. It's awesome. We want to put it on TV like in 2 weeks. I'm like, oh, okay. So they send me the contract. What does the contract say? Sign this and you don't get paid. And, your song goes on TV show. So I'm like, all right. So I signed it. And a couple of weeks later, there it is. 4 or 5 of my songs on MTV's Real World beaming across, America. I was like thrilled with this. And that was that, and went about my business. And about 8 or 9 months later, I go to the mailbox, and there's a check for $1,500 in royalties.
Wow.
And I'm like, huh, that's cool. And the next month, another check for $1,500 in royalties. I'm like, geez, this is okay. And I won't get into why this happened in the music business and all that, which I later figured out. But it clicked in my head like, okay, instead of dragging my gear all over town and trying to hustle to get people into these gigs and all this and that, these one placement or these couple of songs eventually made me $10,000 or $15,000. Right.
Wow.
And I was like, wow. So that's when I really got into it. And I started to learn more about the business and just how to do it. And yeah, eventually I've had, I'm still doing it. I've got over 5,000 placements on film and TV, all kinds of shows and all kinds of.
So after this experience of calling, just to rewind a little bit, call every month for a year. Some people might have made it into that second or third month of follow-up phone calls and then just been like, screw it. They don't care about me. This is not what I'm doing. Where did your persistence come from with that?
Great question. My persistence, I believe, came from one of those kickball games in the backyard with, back there in Pennsylvania. So I remember being probably even younger, maybe being 5 or 6 years old in the backyard, playing a kickball game with my brothers, a couple neighborhood kids, and my dad. Okay. And I'm on the losing team. I'm getting, my team is getting destroyed 35-2 kind of thing. Right. And we're getting towards, halfway through the end of the game or whatever. And I just run off the field. I quit, this sucks. This kind of thing. And my dad takes me around the corner and gets in my face. He's like, not mean, but
right.
Stern.
Yeah.
He's like, you listen, when you play a game, you play as hard as you can until this thing is over. Okay. You got that, kid? And I'm like, yeah. Right. And, I went back on the field and got the shit kicked out of me for the rest of the game, of course. But the lesson was huge. And I've taken this into really everything in my life since then. You have to determine when the game is over because, most things in life are not, 9 innings or whatever. But you play as hard as you can until you decide that the game is over. I don't want to pursue music for film and TV anymore. Okay, great. That's fine. Stop and do the next thing. But if you're going to do it, you freaking do it.
Right.
Dedicate
yourself. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I think people look for the secret. And the secret that I tell everyone, because again, people will look at you and I want to get back to those 5,000 placements, but they might hear something like that and they're at the beginning and what you've accomplished might seem so far away and so impossible to get to. And they want to figure out how to get to you without really understanding that there's a whole journey that followed that path. Or they'll come in and they'll look at me, some of the higher level belts at a school, and see a level of expertise or talent and wonder, like, how do you move that way? I don't get it. And I'm like, okay, you ready for the secret? Show up. Show up. Show up every day. You know what I mean? Show up every day, and you know what? Some days you're going to be 100%. I expect 100%. But the days that you show up and you're feeling 50%, I want 50%. You know, where I want whatever it is, I want you to give me the best of what you have today. It may not be your best. You just show up, you listen, you check your ego at the door, you try your hardest, you fail, you move on, you keep going, and time passes, and before you know it, you've reached these levels. And I think it's very similar to what you're saying. It's like, you know, it's that Nike thing. Just do it. It's simple, but I think people overlook how important it is to just decide what you want to do and go for it with passion, honestly. So,
It is simple, but it's not easy. That's
no, not at all, for sure.
Right? You just do it. Yeah, you just do it, right? But like you said, you do it every freaking day or as much as possible for 20 years, and guess what? Something's going to happen.
Absolutely.
You know, it has to.
Right.
Yeah.
Even with playing an instrument, imagine like I casually play guitar. I wouldn't even put myself remotely in the category as you, but I only got into it, honestly, not to ever have the desire to play on stage, although you always have that side dream as a kid to want to be a rock star. But I'm a huge fan of like Dave Matthews, Jack Johnson, and a bunch of others. But I just really wanted to not only listen to the music, but appreciate it more. And I was like, if I could learn how to play that and it sounds good enough to me where I recognize the song, that's cool. And that's something that's so incredibly difficult. When you pick up an instrument, you try playing that, and not only is it hard to learn, it hurts playing guitar, your fingers are in pain, and it's very easy to put it down. But if you make a simple goal of like, 20 minutes a day, and you keep going, before you know it, you can play a bunch of songs. And it's the same kind of thing I think you're talking about. Maybe you're not going to have that huge jump, but you make incremental success every single day, and eventually you get there. You know what I mean? So when you were after this real world thing, did you have the different contacts to go to, or did you work with the same company that put you on MTV? Like, how did you work on saying, all right, cool, I like this check that's coming in? You're still kind of new to the industry. Like, where do you go next to figure out what the next move is?
Well, you know, part of the gigs that I got there were going directly to the buyers, you know, which are called music supervisors, right? People at, you know, the media companies, the TV shows or whatever that need the music, they need to clear it and license it properly, stuff like that. I also started working with companies that were essentially middlemen between independent artists and the music supervisors. So I would submit my catalog to these companies. They would accept my music for the most part, and then they could help sell it. And of course they get a chunk of that. So it was largely, you know, I would just crank out tunes like as much as possible and then send it to these guys and do whatever. And I'd go down to LA and, you know, run around, try to, you know.
But from like an artistic creative standpoint, without actually having a job assignment where you know maybe a theme or a sound that they're looking for, what are you recording? Like, are you just trying to do some uplifting stuff, but also some sad stuff, some cinematic stuff? Like, what are you doing when you don't really have an assignment and a goal in mind, really?
Well, you know, there are different parameters of what people need for these TV shows. So I kind of identified that. And just like you said, ooh, do I want some slower stuff and some sad stuff for the sad scene? Do I, you know, it's basically just evoking some kind of emotion and not having melodies all over the place so that it, you know, disrupts the dialogue and stuff like this. But, you know, after doing this for a while, I actually realized I came back, I sort of circled back and I'm like, why am I doing this? Right? Because yes, I loved music and I certainly liked getting those paychecks too. But I realized that my music and what I'm about is bigger than getting background music on TV shows. Right? So I actually stopped doing that, not because it wasn't successful, but because it wasn't fulfilling. So I got into recording other music. I made an album which was, this thing actually won Best Independent Electronic Artist in the World in 2000.
Wow.
So that was kind of cool. I interviewed people with big stories to tell and cut their voices into electronic music. So I interviewed a blind man about being blind. I interviewed a heroin addict about being a heroin addict. I interviewed a Buddhist mystic who, had this experience as, this mystical experience. I interviewed a woman who had a near-death experience, went through the tunnel of light.
Wow.
So anyway, this whole album, I put this thing together, and this was an interesting experience as well. I won this award, put this thing out there. All these record companies start calling me, Warner Brothers and all these guys. I'm like, holy shit, here we go. This is going to happen. And I send them the record, and they all listen to it, and they all had basically the exact same feedback. And here's what it was. This is so unique, so creative, so cool, so weird, so wonderful. We love it. And we don't know how to sell an 11-minute song about a blind man.
Huh.
And I was like, so wait, you just said,
right,
this is
it's
great,
new, unique, you love it, yeah,
but we can't sell it. And the lesson for me, the big takeaway was, being the most creative is not necessarily what you want if you are trying to sell it. What you really want in this world is to be not in the box, but just slightly outside of the box, right? So that people can identify, oh, this is an electronic music song that could go on the radio or the dance floor, but it's a subject or whatever, just mainstream enough that people don't get confused, because as you know, people get confused pretty easily.
Very easily, absolutely.
But if you're too much, straight down the middle, you're just a commodity.
Absolutely.
So I teach this to my students. I don't know if we mentioned at the beginning, I teach songwriting at a college.
Okay.
And I try to get them to understand this. It's like, you need to be yourself. You need to put your truth into whatever you create, whether it's a song or a martial arts school, right? Because that is what is going to, make it unique. It's the differentiation, essentially, in business. They call it that. So it was a huge lesson for me.
I would imagine that, pursuing this and having some of these major companies reach out to you had to be an amazing moment that stands out to you. Now, through this experience, and I'm sure you took different paths, and you mentioned this award that you got, are there some other moments where your work got placed, or you had a chance to work with certain people or certain projects that you had a chance to do that you're really proud of and will kind of stick with you for the rest of your life?
Sure. This is another, I guess, example of that moxie of just doing stuff. So I'm also a screenwriter and filmmaker.
Wow.
So I studied screenwriting and wrote screenplays for freaking years and years and years. I was mentored by a top guy at UCLA. I'm like, okay, I'm going for this, here I come, Hollywood kind of thing. And I would get bites on this stuff, but I never had any sales. And, being a first-time screenwriter is just like, oh my God, I thought the music this was hard. This was, a whole other level of impossibility. So anyway, at some point I was like, okay, fuck all y'all. I'm making my own movie, which, I don't know how to make a movie. What the hell do I know? So I get my $1,000 together. I'm like, okay, I'm going to just hire a, editor and a cinematographer and, the actors, the whole deal. So I create this little movie, which, by the way, ended up costing 11 times more than I budgeted for.
Okay.
Right? Because what the hell do I know?
What do you know, right? I'm
like, $1,000. That's a lot of money. How much could this cost? I'm like halfway through and it's $7,000. I'm like, oh my God.
What did I do?
What did I do? And now I got to finish this thing, right? You can't stop in the middle. So, which goes back to the kickball game, right? So anyway, I make this movie, and then what you do as a first-time filmmaker is you put this thing out to film festivals, and hopefully the film festivals pick it up, right? Play it at their film festival, and then hopefully you win something, win an award. And if you get that far, you are in the running. You're sort of vetted through the industry so that you may have a chance of selling a screenplay, having your movie distributed, getting hired as a director, like that kind of stuff, right? So that's sort of the career path. So I put this out to all these film festivals, and nothing. I got shot down by every single one of these guys. I'm like, oh man, there goes $11,000, and that was not happy, right?
Right.
So I'm sitting there licking my wounds, and a couple months later, I get this phone call from this woman who is working at a place called Gaia TV, which is a streaming service like Netflix for what they call conscious media,
Mm-hmm.
yoga videos and documentaries about, whatever. And she's like, hey, a friend of mine at a film festival saw your movie and she thought we'd love it. So she sent it over. We love this thing. We want to license this for international distribution. I'm like,
That's
what?
incredible.
So I essentially skipped at least two levels and got to the goal of, getting my film released in a fairly wide audience. So now it's had tens of thousands of views, getting royalties every quarter, all that kind of thing. And, it started because I was failing. And I failed I failed about 10 times in a row, before something, good happened. So
But I think
again,
the failure is something that people try to avoid, but I think it's something that everyone needs to welcome, because it's just a part of any growth process whatsoever.
mhm.
And I think it's a lot of is about mindset, which you could even talk about, as we get to your book, but a mindset of, oh, I failed, that's the end of it. And I even have situations, and I share this story with people sometimes. There's some great parents that are out there, and there's some parents that, I think their intentions are good, but maybe they're a little misguided. And I'll give you an example. Like at our school, we're not a belt factory. We test, we evaluate, we fail. It's real life. You know what I mean? We
Mhm.
try to make sure that you're not just here for a paycheck. I want you to learn legitimate martial arts. So
Mhm.
once or twice over the years, I've had students that, failed an exam and they have a chance to remake it up at a later date. And I've had parents come to me in tears going, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep making my child feel this way. I'm like, what are you talking about? The sense of failure. I can't see them fail. And they come to me in tears and crying. I have to keep them away from this. I can't allow them to experience failure. And I'm like, I'm really okay with that. Some of your greatest strengths and achievements come from failure. Some of the greatest inventions come from failures. And it's exactly what you're saying. Spent 10 times, 11 times the amount of money, get shot down by everyone. That could be a moment where a lot of people would have completely changed careers and dove into something else and thrown their hands up and given up.
Mhm.
And sure enough, an opportunity comes knocking at your door. How incredible is that?
Mhm. That is a great story with the parents, and I'm sure when you talk to them, you tell them this is what your kid is learning. It doesn't even have anything to do with martial arts,
Exactly.
really,
Mhm.
right? It's like, how far can you push? How you get knocked around in this world. You think your kid's going to get through life without failing? If they do, they're seriously going to be a failure, right?
Exactly. Exactly. No, I think it's a great point. Invite the failure accept it, be a part of it. Don't resist. A lot of people just resist so many things, and you got to just like let the guard down. It's normal. We try to, I think, protect ourselves, and you try to avoid bad feelings, but you kind of need to go through it to really get to where you want to go to.
Mhm.
So may I ask you, with this film that you're speaking about that you spent 11 times the amount on and got licensed on Gaia TV, what was the name of the film, and briefly, what was it about?
Sure. It's called Mystic Coffee,
Okay.
about a wise and magical barista who offers advice with her beverages.
Well, that's pretty cool. Coming from a family where my wife is a store manager at Starbucks,
Oh yeah,
so I'm a
I'll
very
send you
big
the link.
fan. Yeah, please do.
It's also on my website,
Okay.
so you don't have to buy Gaia. It's it's a subscription service. So I'll send you the link. You can put that up there on your.
Absolutely. Very cool.
Yeah.
So, and again, you can feel free to talk about any of the other experiences you have with music or screenwriting, which I think is so interesting because a lot of people, I think, dream to do things like that.
Hmm.
What got you to want to write the book that you wrote and coming up with the title that you came up with? I find it very intriguing and eye-catching. So maybe that was a goal. Like you walk into the bookstore, how do I get people to stop in their tracks and go, that looks like something I want to read?
Well, I would like to say that I'm strategically, together like that, but that's really not the case. I As I often do, I will wake up on a weekend, go to a coffee shop, start, jamming on the coffee, have my notebook or computer, and just write something. So, poetry, journal, screenplay, whatever I happen to be into. And, you know, one day I just started writing something. And when I'm done, I'm like, wow, this would be really an interesting idea to, expand into a book. So I really didn't even think about it. I just kind of did it. And because I live and breathe this stuff, it wasn't really that hard, honestly, for me to do it. It took a while to, revise it and things like that. But what I realized after I was done with this book was two things. One, it put all my cred of being a creative together with my love of empowering people, including myself, to actually do stuff. So I wrote this book, and it's how to get your creative dreams off the ground. And I'm totally down for that. Do your thing, whatever it is. But I realized after I wrote the book that it is that, the fame and the fortune, or whatever our definition of creative dreams are, is actually not the deepest and highest part of what creativity is. What I've come to realize is that creativity at its essence and at its best is a mode or a method or a way to be seen, expressed, and healed in the world. So what am I talking about? To be seen means that, in this world, it's easy to feel anonymous. You're walking down the street, there's a million people driving down the road, they're everywhere. You go online, it's endless, right? That kind of stuff. The next level in is our casual acquaintances, people we work with, people we sort of see. We often feel unseen with them. And even with the close, our real people, our families, friends, good friends, yeah, hopefully they get us and this and that. But I think oftentimes we don't feel deeply seen. So there's the seen part. The expressed part is actually moving from the potential to the actual. So an example for that is the dancer. She knows all the moves. She loves to shake it, but she's at the dance hall or whatever, the nightclub, sitting in the corner while the music's playing. In that moment, she is not a dancer. The second she steps out on that dance floor, she is expressed as a dancer. So when you express and you are seen through that expression, whether it's dancing or poetry or whatever you're into, then there's a sense of healing. There's a catharsis. There's, a letting go or an expression of what you're deeply about when you do this with deep authenticity. So when you are seen, expressed, and healed, then you give that gift to the world, whatever that is, right? But it's not, when I say the world, it's not Madison Square Garden, because that's not going to happen for most of us. It might be 10 people online. It might be one person. It might be, your girlfriend or wife or kid or whatever who you're expressing this to. But here's the real beauty of this thing. When you are seen, expressed, and healed and create something with deep authenticity and you give that gift to the world, you then become the gift because you show others that it is possible to be seen, expressed, and healed. And when we do that, we uplift the entire freaking world.
Dude, I love that so much. I feel like there's an perfect audio clip right there of the breakdown of the philosophy that's inside your book. But to view yourself as the gift, I think might be challenging for some people, even if they have the skill, they have the talent, they even have the recognition from others telling them. What do you do if people, let's say, have all of that but have difficulty seeing it themselves?
Mm-hmm.
What do you say?
Well, I do lots of private coaching and online classes and workshops and all this kind of stuff. So one of the modes, I guess, that we use to cut through some of these blocks, because that's what you're really talking about there, is an identity that someone creates within themselves. I have no value. Mm-hmm. That's the identity, essentially, right? Or why would anyone care about what I think or do or feel or express, right? And that's obviously hugely limiting, mm-hmm. right? So one of the ways that we might get in there, depending on if it's the coaching or the workshop or whatever, is through guided meditation, right? And starting to see in, sort of a separated sense, how much we affect each other and how we are all so connected in this world, right? And from there, make it safe to do this. What happens if I actually show my true heart to the world, right? Maybe it's okay. Maybe I can go just a little bit outside of my comfort zone, right? And from there, like you said, even if you fail, and maybe especially if you fail, you will get the self-esteem to take another step out, right? Show it to your best friend. Hopefully you have a best friend who is not going to ridicule you and, that kind of stuff. And will support you and love you. And hey, that's cool. Whatever your thing is. And then it's like, okay, maybe I can step it up. Maybe I can put it online. Maybe I can do whatever.
So it's kind of like dipping your toe in the water a little bit, and it still comes back to your original point of just getting out there and starting, doing something. And yes, that's going to come with people. That's a scary thing, I think, for people to realize, well, when I do put whatever it is out there, I'm going to be judged by my peers. And whether it's good or bad, just the thought of people evaluating you often seems to give people a almost like a panic attack at times. And it's something that I try to empower, my students as well, that, it's not, when I take the belt off, I'm still a black belt. It's irrelevant of the cloth that I wear. It's how I live my life. It's how I deal with people. It's how I treat every day. And I have no control over anything on this planet except for myself. I can influence people. I can maybe inspire people. That's great. But I think what I try to tell people is, like you mentioned, if you're scared and afraid of all these things, you can't control literally any of their comments, any of their actions. The literal only thing you have control over is yourself. So why don't you just take some ownership of that and give it a shot? I'd rather live a life, and I think most people would, that you could look back and say, I tried, I failed, didn't work, but I did it, as opposed to always wondering what if. And I think that's that pain of not trying something is much worse and much harder to swallow.
It takes courage to be a creative. It takes courage to be anyone great in this world, right? To live big and to take risks, because you are being judged and you will fail. And that shit hurts. No doubt about it. The alternative is, just like you said, the kid who never fails is the failure.
Absolutely.
Right?
So what type of feedback have you gotten since now? How long ago did you release your book?
About maybe 2 years ago.
Okay. And have you gotten a lot of feedback from people that have read it, that have written you and have talked about how it's influenced their lives?
Oh yeah, tons. I get them every week. It's up on Amazon. There's tons of comments or reviews or stuff on there. I've got the mailing list with the blog. I do blog posts, and there's all kinds of videos and stuff on my website. So yeah, I get stuff constantly from people all over the world, and I'll tell you, man, it's the internet. It's cool.
Yeah.
In some ways, not every way.
Sure.
But yeah, people emailing me, hey, I just read your blog post and here's my NFA, not effing around story. And, I failed and I thought about this thing and then I took another step. And I'm like, yeah, man, that's awesome. Like, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to help you guys, rock it in whatever way that means to you.
Do you still have those days, though, where you're still questioning what you're doing or why you're doing it, and then an email like that drops on your email inbox and you're like, oh yeah, that's why I'm doing this?
I do not question. I know this is my path now, and I'm
great.
into it. I do not question that. Do I have good days and bad days? Yeah. Some days I'm rocking it and I am full on NFA. I am not fucking around, and bam, it's like, when you're making impact in the world. And then there's other days, like you said, where you're just not feeling it. You're not focused. It's just like, oh, great. I'm at 30% today. And, all the coffee in the world isn't gonna really help.
Exactly.
So that's just part of life.
That's cool, man. So I think it's great being able to even say out loud that you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. And I feel the exact same way with being in front of people and teaching everything from children to adults. And I try to do whatever I can to get in front of people, whether it's Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, schools, volunteer constantly. And everyone keeps saying, one of the ways that this came about is doing all the different speaking just locally. And people are like, you got to get in front of people more often. I'm like, well, I don't even know step one in becoming a public speaker, but I do like podcasts. And I always talk about how often I don't like all the negative content that's in the media. And I was like, I'm really more a guy of action. I don't like complaining about things. I'm like, it all starts with us. We start to change ourselves. You beat bullying by making sure that you're not a bully and you stand up to it individually. But you have to, take that step back sometimes and go, all right, let me just try something new. And again, I didn't know the first thing about doing anything that I'm doing here right now, but to create an opportunity to take a risk like you're talking about, to not F around and just get out there, be creative and see what comes about it. And for me, what I'm getting is an opportunity to meet some amazing people that are out there. Like I say to a lot of guests, this is often given to the celebrities in the world, but there's so many, even just everyday people is not the right word because it's almost like putting people down, but your average person, I guess you want to say. There's so many people that are out there killing it, that are just outside the box like you're talking about, that their stories need to be highlighted and represented well. And so I'm glad I have an opportunity to utilize this. So I was curious, doing everything that you're doing with your blog, what's the next step on your list of bucket list items that you want to accomplish? Is there book number 2? Is there screenplay number 2? What's going on next?
Oh, well, I'm always got the juggle going. I'm in the middle of my next film right now. We just finished shooting all of it except for one scene or one shot, which is proving quite difficult. That is, up in Seattle, we've got this bridge that floats on this lake. It's like this beautiful space. I'm trying to get a shot of a Jeep. It's a road trip movie, driving east on this bridge at sunrise. So the sun is just coming up over the mountain. You have this beautiful shot. We had it all set up. We got to get this car mount to get the camera steady. Like, it's this whole deal. We got it together once, and there was like a ton of traffic. So it didn't work. We tried it again. It rained. We tried it again. We couldn't get the mount at the last minute. I'm like, oh my God. So anyway, so I'm working on the film. What else am I doing? I've got a photography, sort of project I'm going for with the NFA, just doing stuff online and coaching. It's just, I just keep kind of going.
You're doing that and also teaching at a college as well.
Yeah. Yep.
So you keep very busy.
And also, I work for a company called Brown Paper Tickets out here in Seattle. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but we ticket all kinds of like sort of weird, cool events, like almost underground events out there. It's not Ticketmaster. It's not these giant kinds of events, but hey, you have an event at your martial arts studio where you're doing a cooking class. So I make all kinds of media for Brown Paper Tickets, and it's really cool.
Well, that's interesting. One question I didn't ask you though, do you have a family, children, or anything like that right now?
No, I do not.
Is that something that is because some people that are so involved with career are completely content with that. So I'm not saying it's something that you have to or want to do. I think society just makes people feel uncomfortable. Like, I think I'm supposed to have kids now, and I think I'm supposed to be married. And I know you're supposed to do what you love and what makes you happy and fulfilled. But what's your approach on that?
Well, I would certainly like to have a long-term relationship, which stable and all that kind of stuff. Kids, I think I'm sort of past the point of kids at this point. And, that was kind of a bummer at one point. But, one of my philosophies is what is the reality of your life, right? And you take that and you get the value out of what that is. So, like, for instance, I've got a friend who's an artist, and she's got 3 kids, and her hands are full, which means her time creating her art is limited. So I'm like, okay, well, yeah, she's got that family, and that's great, and she wants more time to do her art, which she's just, it's limited.
Of course.
On the other hand, I look at my world and I'm like, wow, it would be great to have the family or whatever, but that's not where it's at. So what do I have? Well, geez, I have time to make movies and to do photo projects and to work on this business and all that kind of stuff. So, accept reality for what it is and add value to it or extract value from it. It's really,
Well, I think that that's perfectly said, because people do think the grass is always greener on the other side, and their
right.
happiness is when this happens or when that happens. And there's always a thing that has to happen, and then they'll be happy, and then they'll relax, and then they'll enjoy life. And it's like you had mentioned, you could be here for 50 more years. You could, be hit by a bus tomorrow. You got to figure out how to be happy right now. That's the bottom line. And it's,
Sure.
I mean, I don't know. Everyone's got their own different path for that. I mean, for my wife and I, getting together like straight out of college, and then getting married in our 20s and having kids really young. I mean, we had our twin daughters in September of 2006, and I opened up my martial arts school in January. So 4 months later. So it was the first
big year.
the first 3 years of being a new father of two babies at home, running a business with no help really. My dad helped me at the front desk and co-owned it with me, but teaching all the classes, having no sleep, feeling completely run down, then also having a new business, so not getting paid, being broke. And what you start to do is you look around in those moments. And there was a lot of, not to go through every story, but I have lots of moments where, things are really, really tough. And we got a letter in the mail from Santa Claus that was like a $300 money order. The person didn't even want to let us know who it was.
Wow.
I remember my brother showing up at my front door, rang the bell, and was there with bags of groceries for us.
Wow.
And it was the moments of that, sitting at the end of the night when the kids were finally down and sleeping, that you could take a look over at your wife or your kids, or just the fact that you're alive and healthy, because you also have the stories of losing friends to all this stuff. Like, hey, we're alive, and we have walls, and we have a bed. And even though I'm not making money at it, I decided to pursue my dream of running the school. And, maybe we're not making it financially, but we always looked at each other in those moments and said, but we're rich, we're wealthy. We may not have financial wealth, but we have wealth in so many other places. And I think people need to take a step back and figure out, no matter how bad your situation is, there's probably at least 10 or 20 things you could be completely and incredibly grateful for right now, even if you're going through tragedies,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely huge. Yeah.
So anyway, I don't want to go through my whole life story. This is about you, but I'd like to relate a little bit when you bring things
Sure.
up. It allows me to reflect back and see how the stories compare with each other a little bit. But
Sure.
I mean, you have a really interesting story, and I don't even think we barely touched on your life and your career. But if you would take out a moment, obviously I'll include this in show notes, but if people want to learn more about you, this is a great opportunity to direct them to your website, social media, any links on Amazon, etc. So not only that, but obviously any last remaining words on what you'd like to leave the audience with, whether it's about you, your book, or any advice that you have for them, and then how they could find and follow your future here.
Sure. So the best way to get in touch is on my website, jeffleisawitz.com, and you can spell that out and have that link and stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
You get free copies, free chapters of my ebook, so that's cool. And if you're into it, I'll do a complimentary online 15-minute coaching session with you to see if I might be able to help you out in some way with your creativity, life coaching kind of stuff in general, and what I call heart-centered businesses. So, when people are starting businesses and they really care about it, yes, they want to make money, and we obviously work on that, but we also work on you're not just selling widgets, you're doing something because you care.
Right.
So I got all that kind of stuff going on there. And if you have any other questions or anything, you can hit me up on there too.
And with your social media links, like, are you on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, things like that as well?
Yeah. And you can get to all of that through jeffleisawitz.com.
Perfect. So your website's going to be the hub of learning everything about you and following what you're doing next.
Yep.
Fantastic, Jeff. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on to the podcast and share a little bit of your story and some of this life advice. I mean, from that first kickball game that you talked about and how that followed you through your life. That's one reason why I'd like to talk about a little bit about growing up, because these moments that stand out to us, they shape us and they create who we are. And a lot of people focus on what you're doing now, what you're famous for, what you're known for, what your expertise is. And I say this to my students all the time when they run up to me in public and are bowing in. I'm like, listen, they get shocked when, actually, just a real quick little story. They get shocked when they see me in jeans and a baseball cap. Like, you have genes. I'm like, yes, I don't live at the dojo. I'm actually a human being. But what I try to like relate to people is that we all have roles that we play in our life. I have the master Alders martial arts guy. I got the husband role, the father role. You have to learn to separate yourself from all these different roles that you play in your life, and make each one significant as well. Anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked on that, but overall, I think the story that you bring and these moments that help shape us is really, really important to give people a little bit of an outline of why you do what you do and why you think the way that you think. And I think that's what's intriguing, not just, reading your created projects and listening to your music or reading your book, but really learning about why you did that and why you have this passion to follow your dream and you stick with it even when you have those good days and bad days. So I just want to thank you again for taking out an hour out of your day and sharing your story with us. And if anything new comes up, I would love to have you back on again. Maybe when the new movie comes out, whatever project you're working on, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd love to talk to you again in the future.
Cool. Thanks a ton for having me, man. This was great. Yeah, great.
Fabulous, man.
Yeah,
so anybody else that is listening to the podcast, we also are going to have this. We're recording this now also on Zoom, so there'll be the video podcast as well on YouTube. So again, feel free to take out a moment and like us on social media. Find us everywhere at Life's Black Belts. If you have a moment to go on to iTunes or anywhere you listen to your podcast, if you could take a moment and give us a good positive rating and share it with your friends and family. And if you have anyone that you think is a Life's Black Belt, feel free to email us and send us your information. But without any further ado, one final thank you to our guest today and Life's Black Belt, Mr. Jeff Leisawitz. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. You take it easy. Keep on rocking out there.
Absolutely. Have a good one.